Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
Well, hey, that's me. I'm excited to be back. As I mentioned last week, we were unsure if we were going to be able to do Season 8, but we are here, albeit in shortened form. And we are talking about green flags in relationships to complement last season's red flag episode. Week 1 was all about empathy. Week 2 is going to be similar, but ultimately distinct. And that's the first thing that I want to get into. But before I do, I'd love to welcome back to the show Dr. Shariq Sherwani to talk with us today.
Hey, James. How's it going?
I'm doing great. It's Friday. The World Series begins today. I'll be in LA watching the Yankees play in Dodger Stadium tomorrow. So it's going pretty good over here.
That's very exciting to be at the World Series. This is a brilliant experience. I hope you have.
Yeah, it'll be nice. And, you know, I needed to get dog sitters for the day that I'll be out. And one of our colleagues agreed to do that, which was a very compassionate thing for him to agree to. And indeed, we will be talking about compassion today. Are you ready to get into it?
I'm very excited. I'm very compassionate about this topic. I can't wait to kind of like parse it through with you and kind of like let's see how we explore this topic together.
Yeah. So, okay. Last week, we began our conversation by distinguishing empathy from sympathy. And I think that was a really important thing to do. And that's where I want to start today as well. Can we spend a little time unpacking compassion and differentiating it from other things like empathy? What is compassion? What isn't compassion?
That's a great question. When I think of compassion, when I talk about compassion, when people around me talk about compassion, I consider both aspects, personally and professionally. Because a lot of times people feel that compassion is talked about or considered mostly in the personal realm. I kind of disagree in the sense that compassion exists and should be explored and given and received in the professional realm as well. So for me, coming from a caregiving background with my dissertation being in the area of caregiving as well, so compassion when, caring for someone, whether it's a romantic relationship, an intimate partnership, or a platonic relationship like friends and family and relatives and even strangers and colleagues. Compassion is when someone kind of like explores the issue of kind of steps on your toes, but instead of calling them out or kind of like reaching to a very professional approach, you handle that with kindness and the related elements of empathy and sympathy. But in this case, compassion basically is a feeling, so which transcends all cultures, all humanity. So it's a feeling that is very common across all cultures. And we'll explore this a little bit more, but it's a feeling that we kind of experience, and we should be kind enough to offer that to others during our interactions, no matter they're personal or professional.
Okay. I really like that answer. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I attempt to untangle compassion from empathy, what I'm hearing is that empathy is this desire that we have, this skill or ability that we have to step into the experience, to step into the shoes of the other person. Whereas compassion is the kindness that might emerge from that intentional effort. Is that close?
That's very close. However, I would like to add a little bit more. So if you look at the word description, compassion, it emanates from the Greek for co-suffering. So when you show empathy to somebody, you don't have to suffer with them. You show kindness, like you yourself very nicely put together. You show kindness and you empathize with them. And to some extent, you show sympathy as well. But the stark difference between empathy and compassion is in compassion, you suffer with them. You may not know how to exactly fix the situation, solve the problem, but you sit with them. You you suffer with them. It's a feeling of co-suffering. And of course, by extension, the idea is, of course, you want to help the other people, the other group, the other community of which you may or may not be a member, help relieve that pain, relieve that suffering, see what they are experiencing and try to help. So with compassion comes the drive to participate in finding solutions for those situations. That's the slight difference between empathy and compassion.
All right. So it sounds to me like we're starting to get into the realm of like specific behaviors, right? So like specific acts of kindness rather than just being like, I've been where you've been and that's lovely to me, right? So yeah, this idea of like co-suffering and demonstrating that perhaps through behaviors is what leads me into my next question, which is, I think colloquially, right, in the quote unquote lay world, we understand that compassion is something that you should want to strive for when forming a relationship, whether it's platonic or romantic, professional or otherwise, or a blend. What are some specific, quote unquote, green flag behaviors that another person can convey that lets you know that this is a compassionate person and that this is a relationship worth pursuing?
That's a great question. And there's a long list of green flags, and as contrasted by red flags too. But focusing on green flags, the way I have come to understand compassion as part of my scholarship and also just as a human being living in this world, sharing this world with others, walking different aspects of life. For me, some of the green flags of compassion are as follows. Number one, when somebody makes a mistake, kind of like being kind and understanding that they've made a human mistake and finding it in our heart and in our thought process to forgive them for that mistake. So when we see our partners, like you beautifully described, no matter what kind of relationship, when you see that offering of kindness through forgiveness, that is a good person to be in a relationship with. And again, like I said, the relationship does not have to be a specific kind, a blend of relationship. A second thing is when we have overstepped our bounds, when we have made a mistake, be humble enough to actually ask for forgiveness, to apologize. Don't feel like maybe they didn't catch it, maybe they didn't hear it, but maybe they did or not. You're not doing this act of compassion for the other person. You're doing it for yourself. You have to come from this place of honesty and ethical behavior wherein you are trying to send this message, of course, to the person that you're in a relationship with or may be in a relationship with, but you are doing this for yourself. Like I've established earlier, compassion is a feeling of humanity that we all feel. And there are many other examples as well, but these two come to my mind.
I really like the dyadic nature of the description you just gave, where, yes, I think, again, everyone just kind of knows, like, forgiving someone for a mistake. That's an act of compassion, right? We can wrap our heads around that. But on the side of the actor, of the person who made the mistake, that proactive tendency to go out and say, can you forgive me for this? I apologize. I acknowledge this. It makes me think about power. Right? And how if you're a powerful person and there's a power dynamic in your relationship and you mess something up, it's kind of contingent upon you to offer a correction. And that itself can be an act of compassion. For example, take the very common modern, example of a person's pronouns, their neo-pronouns. Someone using non-binary pronouns like they, them, and they're masculine presenting, for example, and you refer to them as he, and you know that they prefer they, them pronouns, and you can come out and you can say, I'm so sorry. I made the connection. I will take a more concerted effort to refer to you in the way that you've asked me to refer to you. That itself, even small, those small little pebbles can lead you to a compassionate boulder, to keep the analogy going.
That's a really good point. I actually like that topic in the sense that I do want to spend a minute or so on that. You're basically laid out in a sense a very sweet and kind and descriptive definition of compassion. As I interact with people, whether in my teaching or in my service or scholarship, or society in general, I've come across this situation on so many occasions. I operate from a place where I sincerely believe all human beings are kind and compassionate, except for sometimes we are not because we are human beings, and some people are not because they are human beings.
No, but baseline though.
Baseline, the
yeah.
people really come from that place of kindness and compassion. So if somebody makes a mistake in addressing the pronouns or ending up a little bit too excited during a conversation, and if you acknowledge your human, your behavior of making a mistake, the other people consistently, I don't have the numbers, of course, database, but consistently in very high percentage, very, very into the high 90s, people are very accepting and forgiving of the unintentional mistakes that we all make on a daily basis. So when addressing somebody's pronouns incorrectly, people are not offended. When you're trying to have some sort of a political or a social message, when you're trying to convey that, and this is where the lines are drawn, but at a human level, in social gatherings, among friendship circles or beyond, people are very acknowledging and accepting that, this is a common human mistake. And especially the issue of pronouns is so new and we are all learning, wrapping our heads around it. So we
Yeah.
are bound to make mistakes, but guess what? Compassion is the one at the heart and the center of it. And we come from a place of honesty, empathy, and sympathy and kindness and compassion. I think the conversation can go in a beautiful direction.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there in talking about like the intentionality of your act, where yeah, it's one thing to say like, yeah, I will respect you or I will be kind to you, but like again, doing something like just apologizing to another person when you have incorrectly referred to them, a small thing like that demonstrates your intentionality to do better, to align with them as a person. And I think demonstrating that intentionality is an act of compassion, which, and this is going to kind of nicely dovetail into my next question, it's something that people desire regardless of relationship type. We talked about how, compassion can, should, and does occur in relationships, be they romantic, platonic, professional, or otherwise. And so my next question is sort of about, excuse me, the dynamism of compassion, right? So how might acts of compassion change across relationships? Asked differently, what elements of compassion might look different based on the nature of the relationship? Because we've talked about this baseline of general kindness and intentionality. And so in terms of like specific differing relationships, what sort of different behaviors or tendencies should and can we look for in order to maintain compassion with others?
That's a great question, and so much to unwrap actually in there. I just want to take us back momentarily to, compassion, as I had mentioned, is a human feeling, whether we are religious or not, whether we follow organized religion or not. Compassion is immersed deeply in the divine law, so which is people who follow God.
Right.
And however, their description, understanding of God may be, it also follows the natural law. You do see compassion in the animal world as well, even though we know that a lot of times injured animals are left behind. But there are immense examples and videos and books and material written on the compassion in the animal kingdom as well. Coming back to humans, so across for millennia across different religions. Like I said, compassion is very descriptive. There are examples of compassion in the religious texts, no matter what text you pick. and the philosophical texts as well. So human beings are not new at this. They've done this before a couple of times. And this is something that is passed down from generation to generation. So compassion is not necessarily taught in writing. Compassion is taught in seeing, in performativity,
Yeah,
in the
narrative.
performance, the narrative,
Yeah.
the seeing and doing and performing. That brings me back to your question. What does that look like? So, and what these elements look like, depending upon the relationship. For example, when we are born, we are babies, right? So the human babies need the most care of all the animals in the world, and for the longest time. So that beautiful relationship, whether we are adopted or adoptive or biological children to biological parents, or if our grandparents are raising us, or we are being raised in a nuclear family, or a joint family, no matter what the structural dynamics are. So that beautiful relationship that parents have, talking about element wherein nothing is expected from a child back, right? We do as parents, as caregivers for our children. That's one kind of relationship wherein there is no business transaction.
Right.
That's one kind. Then fast forward when we are friends, whether in grade school, middle school, high school, and college, and whatever life, whether we go to college or not, when we are becoming friends, and making those relationships is just the back and forth, that we have, kind of like even in moments when we feel like we should not show compassion to our friend or to this person that we are in a relationship with, that's the moment where you stand out as a human being, because that person did not deserve compassion. Of course, in your own opinion, you could be biased in your own favor, because they did not, earn compassion, deserve compassion, you gave them anyway, because
Yeah.
compassion is about you.
Yeah.
Compassion is about your feeling. Compassion is about your training that you've had through family or experience, or those embodied lived experiences that you've seen people show compassion to each other, show compassion to our pets, show compassion to even to plants. Like if we see droopy leaves, we put some water if we have access to water.
Right.
That's an act of compassion to humans, to humanity, and to our shared habitat that we share with other living beings.
That's so interesting. This discussion has become so much more existential than I was anticipating, but I really like it. And I think that if we go all the way back to the first question that I asked you, like distinguishing compassion from empathy, the way that we're doing it right now, it's so self-focused, but in a way that, like in an altruistic way, like I am doing this for me in so much as the thing that I'm doing for this other person will heal my soul almost, right? So I think that there's this sort of like, almost like, I don't want to say religious, but like spiritual element to it. And I think that that's really interesting. And it's something that we've never talked about on this podcast before. That said, I wonder if we can bring it back to the sociocultural. Specifically, I want to talk about gender. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
So I don't think it will come as a surprise to you, Dr. Sherwani, that men in general are less enthusiastically encouraged to be compassionate. And one explanation for this is that modern society and historical society has framed compassion as not just a feminine behavior, but rather an anti-masculine behavior. And this turns men off to engaging in and receiving compassion. And so my question to you can have two potential answers. So I'll frame it in two different ways. One, how can men express compassion without being too, for lack of a better term, girly? Or alternatively, should men be more okay with feeling girly in their acts of compassion? What do you think?
That's a great question, and the way you have framed it it actually reverberates with me so beautifully, because I'm going to answer these this two-pronged question with three different elements. One, again, I'm going to go back to momentarily to the religious element, which is basically the idea of compassion. It's interesting that in the religious settings, it's mostly men who lead these congregations, talk about compassion, and then fast forward out of the religious setting is the men are not supposed to be compassionate,
Yep.
even though we talk about compassion.
It's conflicting messages.
It is conflicting messages, and that's okay. Secondly, the issue of men being thought of as being girly if they show compassion is immersed in our social collective as well, beyond the religious realm, right? I mean, that reminds me of the movie, A League of Their Own, where Tom Hanks is talking about there's no crying in baseball, even though these are women who are the baseball players. So these kinds of like ideas, like it's a sport, we are not supposed to cry, or men don't cry. Men don't shed tears.
Right.
I grew up with those kinds of masculine frames. However, I also remember my father at one time talking about, that tears are a powerful emotion, which for this man who was very manly man, talking about that and making it normalized for me as a kid, it was like really powerful. I didn't understand that. Now, as a grown-up person, I look back, I'm like, tears really are a powerful emotion. Now, connecting back to compassion, I think the third element I want to bring in is the sociologist Judith Butler. She talks about performance. It really is these expectations that society puts on men and also women, because again, if you are a woman who does not show a lot of compassion, otherwise you're an amazing person. If you are a woman who does not shed tears, otherwise you are an amazing human being. It's like, oh, that person has no compassion.
Right. They're less of a woman.
Less
because
of a
it.
woman
Yeah.
because she is not showing that compassion, and with it that comes the ideas of nurturing and kindness and all that. So just by the social and the physical appearance, people, you and I, basically, we are also people, a part of the society. We start kind of like, kind of judging people for the way that they're performing socially. So this performativity that we have been so programmed with, so trained in by our loved ones, by the communities and the people that we interact with as we are growing up and going through different stages of our lives, and the kind of interactions that we have, that kind of like brings in and puts that little extra social pressure. Just like gender, I sincerely believe that compassion has also become a social construct, taking away that power from the individual and kind of forcing that individual to play in this social field, within the society and all that.
Right.
Even though it remains a personal feeling, an individual feeling, yet we have to express it somehow in the social realm as a social construct.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like heterosexual relationships, and obviously because that's primarily what I study at the moment. And in those relationships, it seems to me like men and women can and often do communicate their compassion in different ways, and because of that, there's so much we can learn simply by existing in the presence of people whose gender are not our own. And this is why advice that I always give, I'm not a therapist, but when asked and people say, well, like, how would you advise I as a man go about forming good, positive, romantic relationships? One of the first things I say is find women who you are not interested in dating and become friends with them. Why? Because you can experience what compassion looks like when communicated by and toward women, and it will give you insights that like men are just not trained to experience as much, and vice versa with women. Find men and see how their compassion is expressed, because you're right, that societal expectation that we have, it bifurcates these expressions along gendered lines.
That's a great summary, actually. And I'll go even a step further. Even though we talked about heterosexual relationship, this actually applies to all kinds of relationships anyway. And it really is important to be present in that space. Just like the definition of mindfulness, being present in the moment, I always think of compassion, just being present for the partner, no matter what kind of partner it is. It's just a different person. It's being present in those moments for them, with them, and sharing that space that you talk about with them, and kind of like wanting to do things for the other person. Not when you're being asked to in these relationships, but wanting to. How can I make the life easier for my partner, for my family member, for my religious congregation member, for my colleague? What can I do, and how can I experience that situation with them by being with them?
That's such a good point. And we will be covering that next week when we talk about self-reflection and self-monitoring. But for now, somehow, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Sherwani.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from a podcast studio.